Snow was falling softly that night, blanketing the valley in white silence. The old cabin stood at the edge of the pine woods, its windows glowing faintly with the light of a single oil lamp. Inside, the woman stirred the fire, watching the flames dance and crackle as her young son sat by her side, carefully carving a wooden horse. It was Christmas Eve, and though the world beyond their fence was buried under snow and loneliness, she had promised to make the night warm. The scent of burning pine filled the small room. On the table stood a tiny loaf of bread, 2 wooden mugs, and a plate of dried apples saved for this special evening. It wasn't much, but to her, it was enough. Her son smiled as the wooden horse began to take shape. "Will he gallop like the ones PA used to ride?" he asked, his small hands covered in wood dust. She looked at him for a moment, her heart tightening at the mention of the man who wasn't there anymore. She reached over, brushed the boy's hair back, and said softly, "He'll gallop wherever your dreams take him." Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls, carrying with it the distant groan of trees weighed down by snow. It was the kind of cold that froze rivers and hearts alike, but tonight, inside that lonely cabin, love was the only warmth they had. For a moment, everything felt still, as if time itself had stopped. The woman smiled faintly, thinking of the past years of the days before loss had crept into their lives. Before her husband had ridden off to a storm he never returned from. She had built this cabin with what he left behind, brick by brick, memory by memory. Every board, every nail, carried his echo. Her days were quiet, but her nights were longer, haunted by what-ifs and maybes. Yet for the sake of her child, she carried on. The clock ticked slowly, the sound filling the silence. She poured a bit of warm milk into 2 cups and handed one to her son. "Drink it while it's hot," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Tomorrow, we'll wake early and see if Santa came through the storm." The boy nodded eagerly, his eyes bright with innocence that hadn't yet learned how cruel winters could be. He leaned against her shoulder, and for a while, they just listened to the fire crackling, the wind whispering through the trees, and the quiet beating of 2 hearts trying to stay brave. Then, through that quiet came a sound that didn't belong. It was faint at first, almost like the cry of the wind, but sharper human. The woman froze, her hand tightening around her son's shoulder. The sound came again, a cry weak, trembling, desperate. She turned her head toward the window. The night outside was dark, but in that darkness something stirred. She rose slowly, her instincts torn between fear and compassion. "Stay here," she whispered, but her boy shook his head. "Ma, what was that?" She moved toward the door, the floorboards creaking beneath her boots. When she opened it, the cold hit her like a wave. Snowflakes swirled through the golden light spilling from the cabin. The cry came once more, clearer, now definitely a woman's voice. She sounded hurt, or worse. The boy clung to his mother's arm, his eyes wide with confusion. "Is someone out there?" he asked. The woman hesitated, staring into the dark, where the shapes of trees blended with the snow. "Go fetch my shawl," she said quietly, her breath fogging in the air. Moments later, she stepped out into the snow, the lantern in her hand casting a circle of trembling light. Her son followed close behind, though she had told him to stay inside. The sound guided them down the path leading to the frozen meadow. Her heart pounded with every step. Who would be wandering through such cold on Christmas Eve? No traveler could survive long out here. Then, as they reached the edge of the light, she saw a woman collapsed near the fence line, half buried in snow. The stranger's hands clutched her stomach. Her face was pale, and her lips trembled as she whispered for help. Her clothes were torn, her boots worn down to the sole. She looked young, too young to bear such pain, and yet she was heavy with child. The woman fell to her knees beside her, brushing snow from her face. "Can you hear me?" she asked urgently. The stranger's eyes flickered open, filled with both fear and relief. "Please, help. My baby," she gasped, before a sharp cry of pain tore through her. The boy stood frozen, his breath visible in the freezing air. The woman turned to him. "Go. Warm the bed and bring blankets." He nodded and ran back toward the cabin. She looked back at the stranger, whose body shuddered violently. There was no time to ask questions who she was, where she came from, or why she was alone in the snow. All that mattered was saving her and the child. "Hold on," she whispered, wrapping her arms around the trembling woman. Together, they struggled through the storm until the warm light of the cabin reappeared through the snow. Inside, she laid the stranger near the fire, pulling the wool blanket tightly around her. The pregnant woman's breathing was shallow, her skin icy. The boy stood nearby, fear clouding his innocent face. "Ma, is she going to die?" he whispered. "Not if I can help it," she replied, though her own hands shook as she reached for the kettle. She poured warm water into a bowl, tore a strip from an old sheet, and began to rub the woman's frozen hands. Slowly, color returned to her face, but the pain didn't ease. Her cries filled the small cabin, echoing against the wooden walls. Outside, the storm howled louder as if the night itself was watching. The woman's mind raced. There was no doctor for miles, no neighbor within shouting distance. She had helped deliver calves and lambs, but this was different. This was life and death. She whispered prayers under her breath, asking for strength she wasn't sure she had. The stranger's eyes darted open again, filled with terror. "They're coming," she whispered. "Don't let them find me." Her voice was faint, but the words sent a chill through the woman's heart. She looked toward the window, but saw only snow and darkness. "Who's coming?" she asked, but the stranger only groaned, clutching her stomach as another wave of pain struck. The boy stepped closer, clutching his wooden horse like a charm. "Ma," he whispered, "what if bad men come here?" She looked at him, torn between truth and comfort. "Then they'll have to go through me first," she said, steadying her voice, though her heart trembled. Minutes passed like hours. The cries grew louder, mixing with the wind's mournful howl. The woman pressed a damp cloth to the stranger's forehead, whispering, "Breathe, you're safe now." But even as she said the words, doubt filled her chest. The stranger's fear wasn't of the storm, it was of something else, something alive out there in the dark. A shadow moving between the trees, perhaps. Or men who would rather see her gone than saved. The boy peered out the window, his small hand pressed to the glass. "Ma," he said in a trembling voice, "I see something." She froze, her breath catching. "What is it?" she whispered. "A light," he said softly, coming down the hill. The woman turned slowly toward the window, her pulse racing. Outside, faint through the swirling snow. A flicker of torchlight moved through the darkness, one, then two, then more. She stood motionless, the lantern flame quivering beside her. The pregnant woman let out another weak cry, clutching her belly as tears streamed down her face. The boy turned to his mother, eyes wide with fear. "Ma," he whispered, "are they the ones she meant?" The woman didn't answer. Her hand reached for the rifle hanging by the door, her fingers cold and trembling. Outside, the lights grew closer, and as the wind carried faint voices up the valley, she knew this Christmas Eve was about to turn into a night of reckoning. The fire crackled behind her. The stranger moaned. The boy pressed himself against her leg, trembling. She took a deep breath, staring into the storm, waiting for the shadows to come into view, waiting to see whether mercy or danger had arrived at her door. The silence broke again, not with a cry this time, with a knock on the door. The knock was slow and heavy, each thud echoing through the cabin like a heartbeat. The woman froze where she stood, her hand tightening around the rifle. Her son clung to her side, his small fingers trembling against her dress. The stranger on the floor whimpered, whispering through shallow breaths, "Please, don't let them take me." Her words came weak, nearly swallowed by the crackle of the fire and the moaning wind outside. The woman took a step closer to the door, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then the knock came again, harder this time. "Stay behind me," she whispered to her boy. She raised the rifle slowly and approached the door, the wood creaking beneath her bare feet. The orange light from the lantern cast long shadows across the room, flickering over the stranger's face, pale, exhausted, and streaked with tears. The boy's breath came in short gasps as he peered from behind his mother's skirt. "Who is it?" She called out, her voice shaking just enough to betray her fear. No answer came at first, only the sound of wind howling through the trees. Then a man's voice broke through the silence. "Evenin', ma'am," it called, deep and steady. "I mean no harm. My horse threw a shoe near the ridge. Just need shelter for the night." Her pulse quickened. A traveler, or someone pretending to be one. She hesitated, her mind racing through the stories she'd heard of thieves and outlaws who roamed the backcountry, taking what they wanted. Still, something in the man's voice, calm, measured, didn't sound like a killer's. "You're out here in this storm?" she said cautiously. "Yes, ma'am," the voice replied. "Didn't expect it to turn so fierce. I'll sleep in the barn if you'd rather." She exchanged a look with her son, then back at the stranger lying near the fire. The pregnant woman's eyes were wide, full of terror. "Don't open it," she whispered. "They're looking for me." The woman's stomach turned. "Who's looking for you?" she whispered sharply. But the stranger only shook her head weakly. "I can't. They'll kill him if I speak." Her voice broke into a sob. Another knock came, this one softer, but more insistent. The woman tightened her grip on the rifle and pulled the latch. The door opened just enough for the lamplight to spill out onto the porch. A tall man stood there, snow dusting his coat and hat. His face was hidden beneath the shadow of the brim, but his stance was steady, his breath visible in the cold. Behind him, the faint glow of other lights flickered in the distance. Maybe riders. Maybe something worse. "Evenin'," he said again, his tone polite but firm. "Didn't mean to frighten you. Just need a place to rest my horse and warm my hands." She looked past him toward the dark hills, but saw only the storm and the faint line of smoke from the cabin chimney curling upward. Her heart told her not to trust him. Her conscience whispered she couldn't turn away a soul on Christmas Eve. "There's a shed out back," she said finally, her voice low. "You can stable your horse there. I'll leave a lantern for you." The man nodded once, tipping his hat. "Much obliged." He turned and stepped off the porch, his boots crunching in the snow. She shut the door quickly, sliding the latch back into place. The boy let out the breath he'd been holding. "Ma," he whispered, "what if he's one of the bad ones?" She knelt beside him, brushing his cheek gently. "Then we'll stay quiet, and the Lord will see us through." But even as she said it, her hands trembled. Inside, the stranger's pain grew worse. The woman rushed to her side, placing a damp cloth on her forehead. "You have to tell me who's after you," she urged softly. The stranger opened her eyes, tears glistening in them. "Men from the camp. Soldiers," she gasped. "They thought I was helping someone escape. I wasn't. I only tried to save a child." The woman frowned, unsure what she meant. "A child?" The stranger nodded weakly. "They were burning the shacks by the river. There was a boy inside. I ran in, brought him out. When they saw, they said I betrayed them. They were going to punish me. I ran." Her voice cracked, and she clutched her stomach again as another wave of pain seized her. The woman sat back, stunned. Soldiers out in this weather, that could only mean something serious, either a deserter or a secret being buried. And now that secret had landed at her door. The boy returned from the corner with an extra blanket. "Here, Ma," he said, his voice trembling but brave. She smiled faintly and wrapped it around the stranger. "You're safe now," she murmured, though she didn't believe her own words. Outside, the sound of hooves echoed faintly again, more than one horse this time. She went to the window and peeked through a gap in the curtain. 3 figures were riding slowly down the hill, torches burning bright against the snow. Her chest tightened. Whoever they weren't lost travelers. The man she'd turned away earlier was standing near the shed, pretending to check his horse's reins, but his eyes were on the riders too. She saw him straighten, then glance back toward the cabin. For a long moment, their eyes met through the glassers, full of fear. His unreadable. She stepped back from the window, heart racing. "They're coming," she whispered. The stranger's eyes opened wide in panic. "You have to hide me. Please, if they find me here, they'll kill me and take my baby." The woman looked around the small cabin. There wasn't much room to hide anyone. The trapdoor near the hearth led to the cellar, but it was cold and cramped, meant for storing food. Still, it was the only place. "Help me," she said to her son, pulling a rug aside. Together they lifted the hatch, and the woman gestured toward it. "Down there, quick." The stranger tried to rise, but winced, clutching her stomach. "I can't," she whispered. "The baby's coming." Fear gripped her tighter. "Then keep still," she said urgently. "Stay quiet, whatever happens." She lowered the hatch halfway, leaving just enough space for air. The boy stood beside her, gripping his wooden horse like it might keep him safe. Moments later, another knock shook the door. This time, there was no politeness, only authority. "Open up," a rough voice barked. "By order of the garrison?" The woman's pulse thundered. She motioned for her son to hide behind the table, then took the rifle again and went to the door. "What do you want?" She called out. "Search orders," the man replied. "We're tracking a fugitive woman, young dark hair, carrying a child. She passed this way. Have you seen her?" The woman's breath caught, but she forced her voice to stay calm. "Ain't seen anyone but snow tonight," she said firmly. The door rattled under his hand. "Then you won't mind if we look around?" She hesitated, the fear crawling up her throat. "It's Christmas Eve, sir," she said softly. "You won't find sinners in my home, only a mother and her boy." There was silence outside. Then the door creaked open slightly, just enough for the firelight to reveal the man's face, hard, cold, with eyes like steel. Two others stood behind him, rifles on their shoulders. "We'll be quick," he said. "Can't take chances in these parts." The woman stepped aside, clutching the rifle close. The soldiers entered, their boots tracking snow across the floor. They scanned the cabin, the table, the fire, the boy pretending to be asleep by the chair. One bent to check behind the bed. Another lifted the blanket near the hearth. The woman held her breath, praying they wouldn't notice the trapdoor's faint outline. "Ma'am," one of them said, straightening. "You alone here?" She nodded. "My husband passed 2 winters ago. Just me and the boy now." The leader studied her face for a long moment, then turned to his men. "Nothing here. Let's move on." Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. As they turned to leave, the stranger below let out a muffled groan of pain. The sound was faint, almost lost under the storm, but not faint enough. The leader froze, his eyes narrowing. What was that? The woman's heart stopped. "What was what?" she said, forcing a nervous laugh. He took a step toward the hearth, tilting his head. Sounded like someone groaning. "Tss." "That's the wind," she said quickly. "Gets trapped in the chimney this time of year." He didn't look convinced. His hand moved toward the butt of his pistol. "Ma'am," opened the cellar. Her grip tightened on the rifle. "Ain't nothing down there but potatoes," she said, her voice shaking. "I'll be the judge of that," he replied coldly. He reached forward and, in that moment, the boy suddenly stood up, knocking his cup from the table. It shattered on the floor, startling everyone. The soldier turned his head toward the noise, and the woman seized the chance. She stepped between him and the trapdoor. "You've done your search," she said, her voice rising. "Now get out of my home." For a tense moment, no one moved. The soldier studied her, his eyes hard, then finally lowered his hand. "You're brave, ma'am," he said quietly. "For your boy's sake, I hope you're telling the truth." He nodded to the others, and they stepped back into the storm. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving only silence and the faint sound of hooves fading into the night. The woman stood motionless, listening, afraid to breathe. When she finally lifted the hatch, the stranger was crying softly, clutching her swollen belly. "You saved us," she whispered. The woman knelt beside her, tears welling in her own eyes. "No," she said quietly. "I just bought us a little time." Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the sound of distant thunder. The boy sat close to his mother, his face pale but steady. "Ma," he whispered, "they'll come back, won't they?" She looked toward the window where the last flicker of torchlight vanished into the snow. "Yes," she said softly, "and when they do, we'll be ready." The fire burned low, casting shadows across their faces. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge, it felt like a place caught between mercy and danger, between faith and fear. And somewhere beyond the storm, unseen eyes were watching, waiting for dawn. The storm eased for a time, but the sky kept its iron color, and the wind returned in cold breaths that made the shutters tap. The woman set more wood on the fire and lifted the stranger from the cellar onto a pallet by the hearth. The pregnant woman's face was damp and pale, but her breathing steadied when she felt the heat. The boy poured warm water from the kettle, careful not to spill. He tried to be brave, but his hands shook as he folded another blanket. The woman squeezed his shoulder and glanced toward the back door, where a draft slipped under the frame like a warning. Out behind the shed, the traveler scraped ice from his horse's hooves with a small iron pick. He worked slow, ears tuned to the hillside. The riders had gone, but he knew a patrol never vanished without leaving eyes behind. He studied the cabin and the hills around it. He recognized the kind of place where trouble came and forgot to leave. He took a length of raw hide from his saddlebag and tied his mount to the post, then drew his coat closer, as though pushing some thought back into his chest. He had not told the woman everything at the door. He had come along the river earlier and found a burnt shanty there, ash still warm under the snow. The tracks leaving it were frantic. Some were small, like a child's. Inside, the woman steeped pine needles in a tin mug to make a bitter tea for strength. She pressed the warm cup to the stranger's lips. The stranger sipped and coughed, then finally met the woman's eyes. "Your boy," she whispered. "He is kind." The woman nodded. "He has learned to carry more weight than his years," she said. "Rest now. You said men from the camp are hunting you. Tell me what camp." The stranger closed her eyes, gathering words like a knotted rope. "The dry gulch near the old road," she said. "A winter post for the garrison. A man there runs the supply line. He works both sides. He takes coin from whoever pays. He told the others I was a liar. Said I hid goods or helped someone run. I did not. I only saw smoke at the shacks and heard a child crying. I ran in. He hated that I made them stop, even for a breath." The woman felt heat rise in her chest. "What did you take from them?" she asked. "Nothing," the stranger said. "But I saw something. In the back shed, a small crate marked with a ranch brand that was not theirs. The man lifted it onto a wagon under a tarp. When he saw me, he smiled like the snow could not touch him. Later, he sent men after me. Said I was carrying secrets." The boy watched his mother's face harden in a way he knew. He had seen it the day the last calf died, late in the spring freeze, and she decided to keep the land no matter who came knocking. He went to the window and peered out. The traveler by the shed had turned his face toward the hill again, measuring distances like a surveyor. The boy chewed his lip. "Ma," he whispered, "that man is still out there." The woman stoked the fire and set her rifle within reach but not in sight. "I will speak to him," she said. She pulled on her shawl and stepped onto the porch. The air bit at her lungs, and her breath rose like steam. The traveler turned when he heard the hinge. For a moment, they stood in a stillness that had nothing to do with the weather. "You calmed the soldiers," said in a quiet voice. "That was a risk." "Risk sits in my chair more nights than I do," she answered. "If you know something about them, you should say it." He looked past her to the line of pines, swaying like black sails. "Those were regulars from the winter post," he said. But the man in front carried himself different. Not just a soldier. Someone with a stake. Someone who will not sleep until the thing he lost is back under his boot. She studied him. "Why are you telling me this now?" He hesitated, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth bundle tied with twine. He opened it to reveal a brass token stamped with a crest, the kind issued for ration chits. "Found near the river," he said. "This was stamped for reserve stores, but the mark has been altered. Someone is shaving goods and covering tracks. If your visitor inside saw a crate leave under the wrong brand, her voice could cost that man coin and favor. He will not let her vanish." She stared at the token. "Then I need you gone before he guesses you came here. Riders will return at dawn," he nodded. "I can turn them from your trail, but not for free." Her jaw tightened. "I have no coin for strangers." "I am not asking for silver," he said. I want truth. Who is the child they say she saved, and where is he now? Fear moved through her, thin as a blade. Why do you care? Because you cannot pull a child from fire and leave him in a snowfield, he said. I saw small prints by the river, and none after that. Either he was carried, or he sank someplace quiet. If there is a child in this story, he is at the heart of it. She thought of the baby stirring under the blanket of the boy inside, holding his wooden horse like a promise. The stranger had told her only part of what happened. Go to the barn, she said at last. Warm yourself. I will bring you an answer you can carry, but it may not be what you expect. The traveler nodded once and went to the barn. She watched him vanish into the drifted dark, then stepped back in and bolted the door. The boy turned to her with questions in his eyes. She put a finger to her lips and crouched beside the stranger. You said there was a child, she said. Where is he? The stranger looked at the ceiling as if the answer were carved there. I carried him to the river bend, she said. He was coughing, eyes full of smoke. He asked for his mother. I told him to wait under the old willow while I went to draw water. When I came back, he was gone. I found only a small shoe, and the snow bunched where he had knelt. I searched the bank until my hands bled. Then I heard men in the trees. I ran. The woman closed her eyes. What if he followed the horses? What if someone took him? I feared that, the stranger whispered. I do not know whether a wagon lifted him, or whether he wandered into a camp drawn by light, but that man at the post spoke the boy's name. He knew him. What name? The stranger flinched, then said it softly. The woman recognized it. It belonged to a family from the South Road, a widower and a little one who had lived in a sod house near the ford. The widower had ridden out during summer to seek work and never returned. The boy had been staying with neighbors. In early fall, those neighbors moved east to a town with a doctor. The boy must have come back with a trader or a hand. Now his world had turned to Ashdod. The boy by the fire hugged his knees. Ma, he said, could that kid be at the post now? The woman answered carefully, maybe. Or maybe he is hidden at the river shack, waiting for a person who will never return. Either way, this is bigger than our roof. The stranger took the woman's wrist with desperate fingers. I cannot run anymore. This child inside me is coming sooner than it should. But if there is any mercy left in this country, do not let them use that lost boy to hide their theft. That man will claim I lied, that I made up a child to cover my own sins. He will bury the truth in a snowbank and call it justice. The woman felt the old ache of her husband's absence. He would have saddled a horse and ridden at first light to find the boy. She was only one person, and the night pressed in with its demands. Still, there were other ways to pull truth into daylight. She reached for the small Bible on the shelf and pulled a folded map from between its pages. She laid it on the table and pointed to the river bend. The willow grove, the road to the post, the old wagon tracks that cut through cattails. The boy leaned in, eyes bright with a spark that was not fear this time, but intent. We cannot go banging on the gate, she said. But we can walk the creek and see where it breaks. We can look for that brand the stranger saw. A ranch mark carved where it does not belong is still a mark. If the crate moved tonight, it went on sled runners or a narrow wagon that sinks deeper than a single horse. A patrol leaves a pattern. Smugglers move quieter, but leave sharper ruts where they hurry. The boy nodded like a small scout. I can find where the snow got smashed near the willow, he said. I know how to tell when a rabbit trail stops. People leave bigger signs. The stranger watched them both, hope and dread warring in her face. If you go, she whispered, do not go alone. The woman glanced at the barn. The traveler might help, she said. Ordinary men do not carry ration tokens altered with knife scratches. He has seen what he should not, and he moved like a person who has lost before. For the first time that night, the stranger smiled without a tremor. I knew a man like that once, she said. He could walk into a crowd and notice the only hand that had ash under the nails. The woman set more wood on the fire, then wrapped the stranger's feet in warm cloth. No matter what comes, this child will be born in warmth, she said. That much I can promise. She spoke it like a vow, and the boy felt the cabin grow steadier around them. Like the walls themselves believed, long past midnight. While the stranger slept, the woman stepped into the barn with a lantern. The traveler was sitting on a hay bale, back straight, as if he had never learned to lean. He stood when she entered, and she handed him a strip of bread. "She says the missing boy's name," the woman told him. "A family from the South Road. The man at the post knows it too. If they took the boy to hold over her, they will keep him close to the goods they hide or the books they cook. People guard what binds them most." The traveler's jaw set. "Then there is more than ration theft," he said. "There is coercion. Maybe worse." He took the map from her and studied it. "We can move by the creek while the snow crust is still hard. You and the boy will stay here." "No," she said. "You know the hills, but I know this valley. If they search again while you are gone, I will stall them. If they do not, I will walk as far as the willow and watch the road from the cottonwoods. My boy can carry a note back and forth faster than a horse can turn in this ice." The traveler looked toward the house where lamplight trembled at the edges of the curtain. "You have pluck," he said. "But if they guess you are part of it, they will burn you out to warm their hands." "They already burned someone," she answered. "Fire does not listen to reason, only to courage and water." He studied her for a long breath. At first light, he said, "I'll take the north line to the ford. You take the willow. If I do not return by noon, assume I was turned and hide your friend deeper." He handed her the brass token. "Keep this safe," he said. "If I fall, it points toward a ledger, and the ledger points toward names." When she returned to the cabin, the boy was awake, sitting straight-backed in the chair, like a small sentry. She gave him the token to hold and taught him a simple code with 3 short knocks and a pause to use on the barn door if strangers approached. He learned it fast. He always did when fear gave way to duty. Near dawn, a silver seam opened along the ridge. The woman wrapped the stranger's belly with a cloth band to steady the child within, and placed a small wooden cross above the hearth. The stranger caught her hand. "Do not trust the man at the post," she whispered. "He can shake your hand and cut your shadow away at the same time." "I believe it," the woman said. "But shaking hands and cutting shadows makes a person careless. He will want to come himself when he thinks the net is tight. Men like that always want the final knot." As first light spread, the traveler slipped from the barn toward the ford, blending with the fence line. The woman and the boy moved along the creek behind the cottonwoods, stopping when a pair of crows lifted from the willow with an angry cry. The woman held up a hand to freeze the boy. Through the thin screen of branches, she saw wheel marks on the far bank, sharp and fresh, and a scrap of burlap snagged on a thorn. The sack bore a faint brand that had no business near army stores. The boy pointed at boot prints circling back on themselves. "Someone waited here," he whispered. "Maybe a wagon hid under the bank." The woman crouched lower. From the road beyond the bend came a quiet clink of metal and the sound of harness leather. 2 riders ghosted past the cottonwoods and slowed at the willow. They wore plain coats, not soldier blue, but the way they looked both ways at once told her everything. One dismounted and stepped to the river edge where the snow was trodden by small feet. He studied the ground for a long time, then raised his head toward the cabin. Though he could not see it through the trees, the woman's heartbeat hammered in her ears. The man called softly to his partner. "They still think she ran north," he said. "But the prints here drift toward that ridge. If the boy was taken, he did not run alone." The second rider laughed under his breath. "The boss will be pleased if the child turns up in the same basket as the woman." 2 birds. 1 letter to the judge. A quiet winter. They nudged their horses forward, following the creek toward the cottonwoods. The woman pulled the boy close and slipped back through the brush, stepping where the snow was already broken by deer. When they reached the edge of the meadow, she paused, listening. Far off, a single shot cracked in the clear morning air, then silence returned like a blanket. She did not know whether that sound belonged to warning or loss. She only knew the valley had woken, and the hunt was no longer ruled by storm, but by men who believed the cold itself would kneel for them. She and the boy slid into the shelter of the cabin, just as the sun found the top of the pines. Inside, the stranger was sitting upright, hands on her belly, eyes dark with pain and fear. I heard a shot, she whispered. Who fell? The woman closed the door and leaned her back against it, breath short, cheeks burning with frost. We do not know, she said, but whatever that sound meant, it started the clock. She checked the rifle and laid a second one on the table, an old piece her husband had left cleaned and ready. The boy reached for it without being asked, his jaw set. Childhood squeezed smaller by the hour. From the north came the far-off clatter of hooves. From the road came the hush of sled runners, cutting a new line through powder. The token on the table gleamed in a shaft of winter light, the little crest like an eye. The woman felt the cabin tighten around them again, not as a trap, but as a chest holding living hearts. She looked at the stranger, at the boy, at the map with its creek lines like veins, and she knew the next move would decide who wrote the story of this. Christmas in the valley, she lifted the latch on the side window and cracked it open to hear the road. Cold air slid in, carrying voices she recognized from the patrol and others she did not. The riders had returned, this time without torches, this time moving slower, careful as cats. She glanced at the clock. It was not yet noon. The traveler was still out there somewhere on the Ford Road, either tracking their path or lying behind a log with the snow holding his last breath. The woman shut her eyes for a beat, then opened them again, and in that hard, right moment she understood that mercy was not the same as surrender. Mercy could use steel when the hour demanded it. The hooves drew closer. A hand brushed the door plank from the outside. The boy lifted the old rifle and nodded once, seeking his mother's cue. The stranger pressed her lips together and whispered something too soft to hear. The woman stepped forward, braced herself between the fire and the threshold, and called out in a voice that did not tremble. Whoever knocks must speak his purpose, she said. This is a home. Say your truth before your boot crosses my floor. No one answered right away. Then a measured voice spoke from the porch, smooth as polished wood. Open up, it said. By order of the garrison quartermaster. We have reason to believe this house holds stolen property and a witness. Stand aside, and no harm will come to the boy. The woman felt the world narrow to a point. At that point sat two paths, both steep and cold, and the choice between them waited in the half-inch of space between her. Hand in the latch. The voice on the porch carried authority, but there was something colder beneath it, a calm confidence that came only from power misused. The woman's pulse beat like thunder in her ears as she met her son's frightened eyes. Don't move, she whispered. The boy clutched the wooden horse tight, his small knuckles white. The stranger by the fire tried to stifle a cry, her hand pressing against her belly as another wave of pain rolled through her. The woman turned toward her, torn between compassion and fear. Every sound outside the jingle of reins. The crunch of boots in the snow sounded like fate drawing closer. The man outside knocked again, louder this time. I know you're in there. We saw smoke from the ridge. You've got one chance to open this door and avoid trouble. She steadied her breath and called back. This is private property. I don't harbor thieves or runaways. You have no right here. The silence that followed made her wish she hadn't spoken at all. Then came a laugh, low and dry. We'll see about that. The woman stepped back from the door, loading a single round into the rifle. Her fingers trembled. She wasn't a fighter, but years of surviving alone had taught her the courage of the desperate. She whispered a prayer she hadn't said in years, one her husband used to mumble before heading out on dangerous rides. Lord, give me steady hands. Outside a voice barked orders. The sound of hooves shuffled closer, and she realized there were more men now, 3, maybe 4. They were spreading out, surrounding the cabin. The woman glanced toward the window and saw shadows moving along the tree line. Her heart pounded as the reality sank in. They weren't just here for the woman on the floor. They were here to silence anyone who knew her story. The stranger's breathing grew harsh. They'll kill us, she whispered, clutching the blanket. They always finish what they start. The woman knelt beside her, brushing damp hair from her face. Not while I'm standing, she said firmly, though her voice cracked. The boy moved to her side, eyes wide but full of determination. Ma, he said softly, I can help. A faint shout came from the distance, muffled by wind. She caught only fragments: ridge, wagon, tracks. Her stomach turned. That meant the traveler was still alive and nearby. Maybe he had found proof, or maybe he was being hunted too. She needed to hold out long enough for him to return. Snow whipped against the windows as the storm built again. The night darker than before. The men outside began to move closer, their boots crunching in rhythm. The woman could hear the faint metallic sound of a latch being tested at the back of the house. "They're trying both doors," she murmured. The boy's hands tightened around the rifle she'd given him earlier. She shook her head firmly. "No, you stay here. Do as I say." She crept to the back room where the smaller door led out toward the woodshed. Through the gap she saw two figures, one lighting a lantern, the other holding a pistol. The yellow glow spilled across their faces. One of them she recognized the same man who'd led the search earlier, the one who claimed to be from the garrison. His uniform coat was unbuttoned. Underneath it, she caught the flash of a silver crest pinned crookedly a quartermaster's insignia. Her fear hardened into anger. He wasn't here on duty. He was here to protect his own secrets. She returned to the main room and whispered to the stranger, "He's the one." The man from the post. The stranger's face twisted with pain and memory. "He'll burn us out if he has to," she said. "That's how he ends things." The woman pressed her lips together, then turned to her son. "Go to the cellar," she said. "Take the lamp. If the fire goes out, stay quiet until I come for you." He shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "Ma, I can't leave you." She held his face in her hands. "You can. You have to. I'll come for you, I promise." Outside, the door rattled again, then splintered under a hard kick. The latch gave way. She raised the rifle just as the door burst open, and a gust of snow swept into the cabin. The man stepped inside, face shadowed by his hat, pistol drawn. "Drop it," he barked. His eyes flicked to the woman on the floor. "Well, look at that. Thought I lost you in the snow?" The woman didn't lower her weapon. "Get out," she said. "There's a sick woman here, and a child. You've no business crossing this threshold." The man smirked. "She's not sick, ma'am. She's property of the United States. Ran from a military post carrying evidence she stole." The stranger cried out, voice breaking. "Liar, you took what wasn't yours. You sold the rations meant for the settlers?" His expression turned cold. "That's enough." He aimed his pistol toward her, but the woman moved first, stepping between them. The standoff froze the air. "You'll have to shoot me first," she said. He hesitated. "Don't be foolish. Then stop pointing that thing in my home." Behind him, another soldier entered quietly, his face uncertain. "Sir, maybe we should wait till morning." "The storm? Do your job," the man snapped. "Search the place." The woman's mind raced. The stranger couldn't move. The boy was hidden below, silent in the dark. If the men searched the floorboards, they'd find the cellar. She needed to draw them away. "Your kind have no honor," she said loudly, forcing his eyes back on her. "You steal from widows and call it duty." His face twisted. "You don't know a thing about duty." He took a step forward. But just then, a sound cut through the storm, the sharp report of a rifle echoing from the ridge. The soldier near the door flinched. "Someone's out there." The man turned his head sharply. "Who?" "Could be the scout from the ford," the other said nervously. The woman's heart leaped. The traveler. He was close. Maybe he'd found help, or maybe he was fighting alone. The man cursed under his breath. "Seal the back. I'll deal with whoever's playing hero," he stormed out, leaving one guard behind. The younger soldier looked shaken, his eyes darting from the stranger to the door. The woman took a careful breath and softened her tone. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You see, she's no threat. You saw what your captain does. He lies. He steals." The soldier swallowed hard. "You don't understand, ma'am. He'll kill me if I cross him." "Then you'd rather live under his boot?" she asked. "You'd rather shoot a mother in front of her child?" The soldier's gaze dropped. "I've got a sister," he whispered. "She's carrying too." His voice cracked. "I didn't sign up for this." "Then don't," she said quietly. "Help us instead." He stood frozen for a heartbeat, then nodded toward the door. "Go now, through the shed. I'll say you ran west." The woman didn't hesitate. She lifted the stranger gently, supporting her weight. "We can make it to the woods," she said. The stranger groaned, her breath coming fast. "I can't walk far." "Then we'll stop at the creek," she said. "You hold on." Snow stung her face as they stepped out into the night. The wind howled through the pines, erasing tracks almost as fast as they made them. Behind them, shouts rose from the cabin. The soldiers' warning wouldn't last long. They moved through the storm, the woman half carrying, half dragging the pregnant stranger toward the trees. From the ridge, another shot rang out closer this time. She saw a flicker of movement, a shadow emerging from the snow. It was the traveler, limping but alive, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "Down here," she called, her voice barely carrying through the wind. He turned, eyes widening when he saw her and the stranger. "They're coming," she shouted. "The quartermaster's behind us." He motioned toward the creek. "Follow the fence line. There's a hollow near the rocks. Go." She nodded, urging the stranger forward. The traveler stayed behind, crouching low with his rifle ready. The snow around him glowed faintly in the lantern light spilling from the cabin. The woman looked back once and saw him take aim, steady and sure. A muzzle flash burst in the dark, followed by shouting. She kept moving until her legs felt like stone. The stranger stumbled and fell to her knees, crying out in pain. "It's starting," she gasped. The woman knelt beside her, wrapping her coat around her shoulders. "No," she whispered, "not here." But there was no stopping it now. She glanced toward the ridge. The gunfire had stopped. Whether the traveler was alive or dead, she couldn't tell. The only sound was the storm's cry, and the stranger's labored breathing. The boy's small face flashed in her mind alone beneath the floorboards, waiting for her promise to come true. She pressed her hand to the stranger's and said, "Hold on. I'll get you both through this." Far away, a faint light flickered between the trees, perhaps a lantern swinging in the traveler's hand, perhaps something else. She pulled the stranger close, her body shielding her from the cold, and looked toward that fragile light with every ounce of faith she had left. The world around her had shrunk to snow and breath, 2 heartbeats and hope. Somewhere beyond the ridge, men were still hunting. But in that moment, she knew that one woman's courage could stand against them all. And as the first cries of new life began to pierce the wind, the sound of approaching hooves thundered closer. Promising that dawn and danger were only moments away, the woman knelt beside the stranger, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Snow gathered on her shoulders as she wrapped her arms around the laboring woman, whispering words of comfort she didn't even know she remembered. The storm raged around them, but in that moment, the only sound that mattered was the rhythm of life trying to break through the pain. The stranger's hands gripped hers tightly, her cries swallowed by the wind. The woman's heart pounded with both fear and determination. She had seen death too many times on this land, and she wasn't about to let it win again. In the distance, the faint flicker of lantern light moved through the trees. At first, she thought it was the enemy returning, but then she heard the voice, low, steady, familiar. The traveler was alive. He stumbled into the clearing, one hand pressed against his shoulder where blood had soaked through his coat. Yet his eyes were sharp and calm, the look of a man who had faced danger and chosen to stand his ground. "They're retreating," he said between breaths. "Their leader's down." The rest scattered when they saw the ridge light up. The woman's relief came out as a shaky laugh. "You made it," she said, "but we're not done yet." She nodded toward the stranger. "The child's coming." Without hesitation, the traveler dropped to his knees beside them, removing his coat to cover the stranger. "What do you need?" he asked. "Fire," she replied. "In a place away from this wind." He looked around, then pointed to the hollow between 2 rocks near the frozen creek. Together, they lifted the stranger and carried her to the shelter where the snow couldn't reach. The traveler struck a spark with his flint, and soon a small fire glowed between them, its light reflecting in their weary faces. The woman took charge. Steady as she had once been in the days when her husband was alive, the stranger's pain grew stronger, but so did her resolve. The woman held her hand through every breath, whispering courage into her ear. Minutes passed like hours, until finally a cry filled the night, not of pain, but of life. A baby's wail broke through the storm like a miracle. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she wrapped the newborn in her shawl. "It's a girl," she whispered, strong as her mother. The stranger lay back, exhausted but smiling faintly. "Thank you," she murmured. "You saved us both." The woman brushed the hair from her forehead. "No, you saved yourself. I only stood beside you." The traveler looked away toward the ridge, where dawn was beginning to push through the clouds. "We should move soon," he said. "More men might come. But the quartermaster, he won't be leading them anymore." The woman frowned. "Is he dead?" The traveler shook his head. "Not dead. Bound to his own sins now. I turned him over to the patrol coming from the North Road. They were looking for him, not her. Seems the army already suspected him of stealing supplies. The men who followed him ran because they knew justice would come with daylight." The woman exhaled slowly, the tension easing from her chest. "Then it's over. For now," the traveler said. "But they'll still have questions, and you'll have to explain how a fugitive came to give birth on your land." She smiled faintly. "I'll tell them the truth, that I helped a mother and her child on Christmas Eve. If they can't understand that, then they don't deserve to wear the uniform." The stranger looked between them, tears streaming down her face. "I don't even know your names," she said softly. The woman's eyes softened. "Names don't matter tonight," she said. "What matters is that you live. When the road's clear, you'll take your child and find a new home where no one knows this story." The stranger nodded weakly, clutching the sleeping infant to her chest. "And you?" she asked. The woman glanced toward the distant cabin, its chimney barely visible through the trees. "I have a boy waiting for me," she said. "He's my reason to keep walking through every storm." The traveler smiled quietly. "You've got more courage than most men I've met." She gave him a tired smile. "Courage comes easy when love is what you're fighting for." They waited until the wind eased before returning to the cabin. The woman led the way, holding the newborn close to keep her warm. The boy was waiting by the fire just as she'd told him. When he saw them, his eyes filled with tears. "Ma!" he cried, running to her. She knelt down and hugged him tight, the warmth of his little body melting the last of the fear in her heart. "You did just what I asked," she whispered. "I'm proud of you." He looked up at the stranger and the baby, his eyes wide with wonder. "Is that her child?" The woman nodded. "Born tonight, when the storm was at its worst. She's a Christmas baby." The boy grinned shyly. "Can I hold her?" The stranger smiled faintly and nodded. He took the baby carefully, his small hands steady. The woman watched him with pride, realizing that even in the harshest winters, life could still bring warmth. As the fire burned brighter, the traveler cleaned his wound at the table. "When the road's clear," he said, "I'll ride to town. The sheriff needs to know the truth. Those stolen goods, the missing records, they'll find everything they need in that quartermaster's wagon." The woman poured him a cup of broth. "You've done enough already," she said. "Rest here a while. You're safe now." He met her eyes across the flickering light. "Safe," he repeated softly. It's been a long time since I heard that word and believed it. The stranger, resting near the fire, looked peaceful now. The baby's breathing matched the crackle of the flames, soft and steady. The woman leaned back in her chair, exhaustion washing over her, but her heart was lighter than it had been in years. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The snow glittered under the faint morning sun. It's untouched and pure again. Later that morning, the traveler stepped outside and looked toward the horizon. The sky had cleared into a pale gold, and the valley stretched out below, calm and still. When the woman joined him, she carried 2 mugs of coffee. "It's quiet now," she said. "Almost too quiet," he smiled. "Peace always feels strange after a battle." She looked at him thoughtfully. "You could stay, you know. Help me fix the fence come spring. There's work enough for 2. He hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the hills. "Maybe," he said slowly, "but I think the road still has a few turns left for me. Still, I'll remember this place. And if you ever need me, light a fire on the ridge. I'll see it." She nodded, her throat tightening. Then may the road be kind to you. He touched the brim of his hat. And may your boy grow up knowing what real strength looks like. By noon, he was gone, riding east through the white fields until he disappeared beyond the pines. The woman watched him go, the boy standing beside her with the baby in his arms. She turned to him with a smile. You know, she said softly, maybe Christmas miracles still happen after all? He looked up at her, grinning. You think this was one? She nodded. I think it was exactly that. Over the following days, the snow melted slowly. The stranger regained her strength, and when her baby opened her eyes for the first time, the woman saw a spark of life that felt like hope reborn. They named the child Grace because, as the woman said, that's what saved us all that night. When the soldiers finally returned different men this time, honest and respectful, the woman told them everything. The truth about the quartermaster, the crates, the stolen rations, and how a brave mother had risked her life to save a child. They listened in silence and then saluted her before leaving. No charges were brought, no questions pressed. The snow had already buried the past, and the dawn had written a new story. Before spring came, the stranger and her baby left the cabin, heading south with a promise to start anew. The woman and her boy stood by the road, waving until the wagon disappeared. The valley lay calm beneath the sun, and the air smelled of thawing pine and new beginnings. That night, when the fire burned low, the woman sat with her son and whispered, "Sometimes God sends us storms just to remind us what warmth feels like when it returns." He nodded sleepily against her shoulder, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. As the last embers faded, she looked out through the window. The snow outside shimmered under the moonlight, and in the distance, she thought she saw a single light moving along the ridge, a traveler's lantern, steady and sure, disappearing into the night. She smiled softly, her heart full. It had begun as a night of fear and ended as a story of faith, love, and redemption. And on that quiet Christmas Eve, deep in the valley of snow, she finally believed again that even the coldest hearts could find warmth if they dared to keep their fire burning.